Okay. So anyway, as we discussed, developer portal and whether or not we wanted to use the wiki and or if we wanted to have our documentation live inside of GitHub and then use a pipeline just like we use for everything else to pull the documentation out of GitHub and put it into whatever content management system we're going to end up using. Most likely the front end of the developer portal will be Drupal.
Well, you said the student do it. You can put it in multiple places.
Yeah, I mean, well, and that's the point, is it can go anywhere it needs to go. If it's the problem with Atlassian and the wiki is the only way you can export it is into a Word document or a PDF. You can't even get it in wiki markup. And in the old days, I used to be able to take the wiki markup and do anything I wanted with it, but they broke that quite a while ago. You can import Markdown, straight vanilla Markdown, not GitHub Markdown or anybody else's. So it doesn't have tables and a few things like that. You can import it, and it immediately turns it into its internal wiki format, and then you can never get it back out. You can also import wiki markup, but the same thing, once it's imported, you can't get it back out. It is all just their internal format. So Atlassian has really screwed that up, in my opinion, because you can't do anything with it other than pulling it out in Word or PDF is useless. So as we were talking about this, we've been talking about it in our developer portal meetings, and it dawned on me that Alex had already published a document this way. And this is what he did. This is the Notify Me. This is a GitHub. He actually had a separate repository for it called Notify Me API Docs. And his README is the document that he put out there. We would need to figure out what standard we would want to use, because the READMEs on the GitHub repos are probably not the documentation we want showing up in the developer portal, but a name like that for the developer portal, you know, like developer.md or something like that.
We talked about even coming up with a whole folder.
Yeah, and so, you know, just some sort of a format that, you know, if our bot just goes out and finds this in any of our GitHub repos, it says, oh, that belongs in the developer portal, and off you go. What the nice part about this is that the tech writers could fork the repo, and they could make their update change. They could make updates to it to fix our poor grammar and various things. But then you've still got the push request kind of stuff, or the pull requests and that kind of thing that you can use in order to control that and say, you know, is this really ready for prime time? Did they actually modify the meaning when they modified what they're doing? Because we're doing that right now in the developer portal. And
where the tech writers change.
Yeah, the tech writers are you know, they're fine at English and technical writing, but you know, sometimes you lose the meaning by the change that they tried to make. It says, oh, you know, this is supposed to be this, and then they change it, and no, it wasn't. And you know, so you want to have that version tracking. And the problem with Atlassian is I get notified every time Elizabeth makes a change to any of my documents. I've got 50 notifications sitting in a folder in my email right now, and 3/4, if she puts a comment, it sends me the comment. But if she just makes a change and saves it, it tells me to go to Atlassian and go to the page history to see what changed. And so it's just not a usable system and not going to be convenient for the developers. So anyway, Alex built this one. Go ahead.
GitHub has a wiki feature, which it publishes webhooks whenever anything happens to it, and is actually a Git repository in its own right, and it uses Markdown for everything.
The thing that we need to also allow for is searching through the developers portal to find things. So I'd like to include the documentation.
We want to have a
search
consistent
results.
interface for everything all in one place.
I know.
The wiki is per repo.
And what I'm saying is, instead of having a repository that is essentially our wiki, we could use the wiki in our repositories, have subscriptions set up with webhooks to get notified when that changes, and push that out to the developer portal.
That's got some merit, I think.
The one thing about that, though, is that we liked having it in the repository too, because if for some reason we ever switched off of GitHub, for who knows why, that came with us.
Yeah.
Which with the wiki is still possible, just not quite as easy.
Yeah. Well, it's not hard though, because like I said, it's a Git repository that you can check out independently of the main Git repository.
Would that cause it, or at least would that potentially make the code and the documentation drift a little since it's a separate repo?
Well, it's in GitHub. It's visible as the same
Mm-hmm.
repo.
You
I
tell
would be
me,
more
you know.
concerned about it drifting. I don't know.
For me personally,
I'm
when
just
we
throwing
kind
it.
of started
Yeah,
that discussion,
yeah.
The wiki is fine because it's right there, but I am always of the camp of I like the documentation right there in the code so that it's easy to get to. And the wiki is fine, we can do it that way, but I do kind of like having it in the same repository. I think it's easier.
And we're talking about
for me to keep
GitHub wiki, not
Yeah.
Confluence wiki. Yeah.
Yeah, so as we were thinking about this, it dawned on me that Alex had done this already, at least with a document. The thing that we lose, the biggest thing that we lose if we move off of the wiki is Glyphy, is diagrams.
Why do you lose it?
Because Glyphy is a Confluence
Confluence plugin.
plugin. And so we don't have access to so if you're writing a markdown, you don't have access to Glyphy at the same level that you do, in that integrated level that you do if you're inside the wiki environment. You just fire up Glyphy and it's right there and it automatically inserts. It handles the management of the file and all of that. Alex, what he had done is this. His repo, he's got this document. This is the Notify Me API documentation he did a while ago. And he has got, this is all Markdown. This is GitHub Markdown, not vanilla Markdown. Okay, there's a difference. GitHub Markdown supports tables. Vanilla Markdown does not. If you want a table in vanilla Markdown, you use the HTML tags for a table. I don't know why they skipped that part. So he's using GitHub Markdown, which is great because then this table looks, like it's supposed to. But he also threw in, this is not obviously Markdown.
That's draw.io.
This is draw.io. Okay. And so what he has done, and this is what we're trying to figure out is what kind of get some feedback on. So what he has done is if you look at the structure of his repo itself, he's got these markdown files and there are various, these are linked off to these other files. And then he's got flows, and these flows are draw.io. If you haven't been to draw.io, I'll show it to you in just a minute. But basically, he's got an actual, he's got the PNGs, and he's got his little README right here. PNG files are the actual flow diagrams. He saved them as PNGs. And then the XML is the actual source that draw.io can use. So if you need to go modify it, you can do it that way. Okay.
Because I was
So
worried
it's-
about somebody creating it in a separate.
Yeah, if you create it in a
account,
separate account, the
then nobody
biggest
else can update it.
Yeah,
Because-
draw.io.
draw.io would work, and draw.io I've been playing with it. It's pretty nice. I mean, I have OmniGraph on my machine, and that's great, except for if I save it as a Graphel file, you have to have OmniGraph in order to go change it, which is kind of a problem. But draw.io runs in your browser. It's just, I mean, it's got all sorts. It's got all the basic stuff that you can do with Glyphy or anything else. Shape libraries and all that kind of thing. And then the interesting thing is it's tied to this one. At least mine is tied to my my Google Drive account. And so when I save anything, it saves it in Google Drive. And I think it'll work with Dropbox or a number of others as well. So, and you can export it, you can do various things like that. And so if we decide that this is the direction we want to go with using just Markdown and just putting it, however we decide to structure it inside of GitHub, pieces inside the repo or whatever, this is what you'd be using. You would use, and then in the source,
Just store the XML as well.
in the source, you just store the XML, or you store the XML in there, and then you I got to go back one. This is the README I want to. What you do, this is Markdown. If anybody hasn't seen Markdown, this is what Markdown looks like. It is essentially wiki. It's like wiki markup. You can write everything you want to write from the keyboard without ever having to use any WYSIWYG kind of an editor. There are WYSIWYG style editors out there for it. There's a number of them on the Mac. There's I can't remember what this one's called. What did I call it? What is this one? Byword is one that will actually show you if you put wiki markup in, and it will skip that. So you can use editors, and you can use editors on your iPad. You can use editors. You know, there's Atlassian, or not Atlassian. IntelliJ has a Markdown editor that's pretty good.
Emacs has a plugin.
Emacs is well, if Emacs has got a plugin for it, then that's the way we're going.
Yep.
I mean, that's just the way it is. But and then his diagrams, all you're really doing is he is putting in a link. This is just a link. That's how you put it in. So he's linking back to his PNG file. And that's how you include a diagram in.
Which is great for us because that'll work in our process to get it into the developer portal.
Yeah.
Because it'll all still continue to link out to GitHub.
So, I mean, this is we're really just floating the idea right now.
I really like it. I'm really good about putting a lot of binary images in our main repo, and having repo blow. Because every time we change that binary image, we have a copy of it.
Yeah, full copy.
Yeah.
And so maybe putting those binaries in a CDN and linking to them, or making sure we have large files to support with our Git.
I think that could be, however, we could even leave it up to the developers as long as it's linkable.
Yeah.
As long as they
They'll
stick
just
the
know that
link
when
in the
they-
markdown, we're fine with
They'll
it.
just need to know every time that they do a checkout or a pull, it'll pull down the whole image every time, every version of the whole image every time.
Yeah, I mean, so if you wanted to stick it in a CDN, that works for us. It just, the link needs to be accessible publicly.
It doesn't
Well, I
cost
think
us
that-
anymore except for the time it takes you to wait for it.
Yeah, I think that the issue there might be just making sure that our developers are educated on the implications of that.
Right.
Yep.
And so if we have a best practice to say, we worked it out, we've got an issue with, we really don't want to store all these great big, binary files out there. So, the PNGs, and so what we're doing is this. And if the pipeline handles it, that'd even be, the best.
Yeah.
You can put them in S3 and Cloud Flare. You can put it in.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, the
CloudFront.
pipeline will handle it automatically easily because the link is
Yeah.
just the link. And so it doesn't matter where it's from, the parser will. work.
But you have to have
CDN
some place
idea.
you have to have
That's
some place to
exactly
store
what
that
it's for.
PNG, or you got to
Yeah.
create the PNG on the fly.
Yeah, no, I think we'd have to require them. I like the idea of requiring them to provide the PNG.
Yeah.
I don't want to produce it.
But then they have to have some place to put it.
Yeah.
So another potential option, and this has the drawback of not being able, I don't think you can embed the source in GitHub, is using something like Lucidchart where you can publish a live PNG rendering URL of your diagram, and then as the diagram gets edited, the PNG automatically gets changed, and then it's just a link.
We can't do that with draw.io.
You could do it with,
I mean, Lucidchart's good too.
Well,
I mean,
but-
they're pretty much sixes.
Yeah, draw.io doesn't have a centralized data store.
No, it uses your
Oh, wherever your XML file
Yeah,
is.
I
the
like-
advantage to Lucid is we can have an organizational account there that
could ya?
everything's in.
You could also connect from Draw. You could make whatever you stuck in your Google Drive public, but we're just reliant on someone always leaving that public. But the thing is, with Draw.io, we'd still get the source. So if there was ever a reason to change that, we have the source. We just reproduce it somewhere else. And
What's
stuff.
what's the pricing like
yeah,
for
the
Lucid?
pattern of that Alex had. is like
I
sources
don't
in the
actually
repo.
know.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and
I like that.
I like having the
I like
source in the
that too.
repo because that prevents us from having any kind of like having to deal with accounts and whose account it's under, and who had access to it. And then at any time
Yeah.
we need to reproduce the image because wherever it was fails to exist, we just open draw.io and re-export it and we're done.
Yeah.
What's the cost structure of draw?
Draw's free.
Draw's free.
It's like a
Always
Google,
free?
Google 2-day project that
Really?
Yeah.
maybe it'll be a part of Google Apps someday.
Yeah, Lucid is for, depends on how many users
Lucid
you have.
gets
For
priced.
50 users, it's like $300 a month.
Yeah.
It's a
If
little-
we have, if we're using Git for our workflow and we're using Markdown, storing everything in Markdown,
Mhm.
I'm a Drupal fan
Mhm.
and I've done a lot of Drupal development. But we could just use the static site generators like what, and make if we wanted a pretty web. central
The thing
website.
is that we want documentation to fit into our pretty website.
Okay.
Not what the developer.
Especially the
wants
search,
on the
right.
site.
especially the search.
So if we are going to use Drupal for all of its goodness, I mean, we can also use Drupal for its publishing workflows. I mean, there's a reason why 30% of media companies use Drupal for their newspapers and magazines.
Yeah. We could stick the images in Drupal.
There's
Let
also
let
get
them
large
use the
file
Drupal
support.
in doc.
Yeah, the only downside of Drupal is that the only downside of what we're currently planning on using Drupal for is that it's just for API and event documentation, not system documentation. So there's that limitation
Because like
in
you,
terms of type of documentation.
you get your organic groups, so you have these complicated ACLs and all these things. So you don't have like someplace separate for a public document and a private. You just mark it
Right.
as being public.
Yeah,
I mean, there's lots of.
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah, and we're
Yeah,
talking
Drupal's
mostly
good.
for all public documentation.
Yeah, this is just public stuff
Anything private would,
We-
for the time being, continue to
in
exist
the
on
private wiki.
Well, just out of curiosity, I mean, maybe you're not planning on it, but do you have a problem with having the system level documentation in Drupal as well? That's just,
Deborah
Deborah
Beiser might. She's mentioned in the past that she did. She wants to keep the focus strong on those things, but we can, if there's a way to do it that doesn't detract from those other two things, she might be okay with it.
And there's no reason to not have it in the GitHub repo, because we can make it so, we can standardize the microservice only pulls the kind of documentation we want. And then you're free to put whatever you want in the GitHub repo. But yeah, currently
Because
it's
I
just
really,
service
I like
and
the idea of using Markdown. I like the idea of using some sort of an open diagram formats, just because then it doesn't matter what tool we're using to present it.
Yeah.
We're essentially
We can automate
taking
it
that
the way we
whole,
want.
the same API concept that we've got. You know what, I produce an API and then you put whatever UI you want on front of it. Doing the same thing with my documentation.
Yeah, that's the
My
biggest
documentation is
plus.
just Markdown. You can get Markdown import, support for
Lots of
almost
stuff.
anything out there. If you like Known for your personal blog, that's great. Known doesn't do multi-markdown or anything. It just does vanilla Markdown. But you can make it work.
Yeah, that's the biggest
And
plus
so-
for us, is that no matter where we go at this point, if we do it that way, even if we just set to flat
'Cause-
GitHub,
Yeah,
All the
because the
documentation.
problem right now is everything that we've got in the wiki is going to have to essentially be redone. Because like the OAuth doc that I put out there has got 7 or 8 diagrams in it. They're all going to have to be redone. Just to get them out of the wiki,
Yeah.
because there's no other way. There's no good way to get them out of the wiki.
Right.
And so, I mean, we need
Once
to,
they're in
this one,
here, it was-
once they're in here, you put them wherever you want to put them, convert them to whatever you want. If you've, it's really not that hard. It'd be nice if we could, I don't know how open the.
yeah, we
the-
could use Git's LFS.
Yeah.
I mean,
So-
because that
It's,
we
that's
could,
the point of it is.
Yeah.
I really
What's the
like the
point of it
docs and the,
to keep the big binary blobs out of your Git history,
Mhm.
so that they're not being recopied and
Is there a cost
downloaded
to
on
it?
everything. Yes, there is a cost to it.
if it's just small things like this, you can make an orphan branch and put all your, call it CD, CDN or something, and put your
True.
binaries in the orphan branch, and then
We'd have to
it's
train
checked
people to
out.
make sure they understand what that
Yeah.
means. And
I think
So
there might,
we've got,
it'd be nice to have a simple solution for all of our developers,
right.
because
Mhm.
yeah, we don't want them to have to jump through a ton of hoops to get it done.
I like the Markdown in the Git repo. I think that's great.
Me too.
I also like Drupal's publishing and workflow tools,
Mhm.
and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. As that.
The only
evolves.
downside of Drupal in my mind is that now you have to have the developer think of another system. I like getting the GitHub repo because then they just focus on that thing, and then when they're done there, it's all done.
And it's nice because then we don't even have to control ACLs. We're not giving anyone access to the Drupal site. It's all being done automatically. And we have one place that we're controlling everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, and the pull requests, like Brent was saying, was a huge deal for us, because being able to vet everything that's going in and out is a big deal, because right now that is impossible. If changes happen and they're already public and then we realize something went wrong, we have to go change it and pull it back. And so having a pull request to be able to say, this is exactly what happened, and to be able to revert that is a lot nicer.
So the map project that Aaron is chief on is he generates markdown for the academic programs.
Mhm.
And then we deliver that markdown to another app that creates a setup website from it. And so we're storing it all in markdown. And I don't know, it's pretty cool.
And that's the same idea that we've got with this.
And it's, I mean, if you look at this, it's really incredibly simple. Once you understand a few basic tags on this document that's up, you can read this thing, and and so typing it is just as easy. You know, it's really not hard to do. And like I said, if you need support of an editor to do it, you can there's a lot.
Every single
Well, and GitHub's
text editor has a markdown plugin.
Yeah, I mean, Markdown is everywhere.
and GitHub's documentation for GitHub flavored Markdown is brilliant and amazingly easy to read. And so
Yeah. Even the technical writers, if they wanted to edit the markdown directly, I don't see that as being a barrier. Give them an hour or two to read the documentation.
and that'll be good.
Is there any concern that I can't really see what this is gonna look like when it's finally displayed in Drupal?
Go
Is there any
click
concern
on
about
preview.
bias?
There's preview of the markdown all over the place. If you're in your editor, in GitHub itself.
It'll look exactly the same way that it does in GitHub, just that we might stylize what's around it a little bit.
So
But the documentation
what
itself
preview
will
was
look
I
the way
don't
it
see
looks in
preview.
GitHub.
So
When you edit the
So-
document in
Yeah.
the
We can
browser.
theme it, but we
Oh,
can't really.
Yeah, we're not gonna modify
Change
the
the
way
markup.
that
Okay, I got
tags work. We might theme it just a little bit to match what we're doing, but that'll be it. It won't change the style.
Oh yeah, I can
I'm just
edit
gonna
it.
throw this out there, there's a Palmer element.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I hear this.
No, there literally is a Palmer
So you
element
can
that
get
puts
preview
in
changes.
Markdown and
Doug,
renders HTML.
You can actually edit in GitHub. And
You
then,
can preview it live before you commit it.
yeah. So
Which
you've
is how
got,
probably a lot of the
Okay,
technical writers. will
that
be
answers
doing
that
this.
Yeah.
So are we going to, if you guys want to have pull requests to do quality control, are you going to protect your master branch so we can't commit to it without?
I don't know if we need to pull requests. It probably is down to individuals in my mind.
So when, right now, like if this doc was in the notify me repo instead of a doc repo, and a technical editor made some corrections or tweaks and then saved it, that's a commit to master.
Right.
And that triggers a new deployment of the software.
Right.
Is that what we want?
It's a good question.
We can make our pipelines too realize that.
If you're worried about it,
changes
you
will
could
make
have
it
the
to docs.
pipeline.
Right.
And that would be a,
I would let the individual pipeline creators determine whether that's
Okay.
important to
No,
them
I
or
think we should, then we get to count more deployments.
not.
the tech writers are deploying more than anybody else.
Make lots of grammatical mistakes and you'll get a million deployments.
yeah, I mean,
You're right, though.
Each team on their own, if they want to ignore that, then in the pipeline, you just say, was there any change made to anything but docs?
So this would be where I'd win because I have those. And I
Yeah.
I think we all tend to read our documentation the next day and go, wait,
I
what?
think let the domain team
Wait,
determine
you
if
read your
that's important to them or
documentation the
not,
next day?
you know?
Yeah.
I thought it was a write once and
Wow,
forget.
overachiever.
It's a write once and forget. So.
I try to not do what I'm gonna get yelled at by Deborah for,
I
so.
have to go back
Good
to
luck
the
with
and change a few Spanish words back to English.
Yeah, that one.
All right.
So
So
what do we decide? Is there
if we
some-
have any, basically, so this is what we're looking at doing. Would like to throw some trial balloons out there. I'm definitely not the pipeline guy, but we need to there's an issue here and I talked with Matt about it yesterday. Regardless of what else is happening with developer portal and all of that, we need to start generating content. And we need to get the content, the how-tos, tutorials, all that kind of stuff out there. Because right now, like with CTL, when we were sending them some docs that I had done, I had to basically, because it's in the private wiki, I had to export the document as a PDF and email it to them. And so
Which is
that's
lame.
completely unacceptable. And so as we start doing documentation on it, we need to throw some of these up. It's not hard. The nice part about it in GitHub is it's not hard to restructure it. If you don't like the way it is, okay, we'll do it some way differently. It's just not that hard. And but this is a pretty good idea of how to get documents out there. We'll just need to in the next little bit come up with a format and say, okay, here's our
These are the
format
sections
version
you-
1. Let's try it.
I would really suggest I'm being convinced, and the emphasis to our guys ought to be make videos. Because that's more likely to happen. Quit worrying about good writing. Make a video, show you how you did exactly what we did here.
But
There is
sometimes
sometimes
it'll take
video you
5
don't wanna
minutes to get
wait.
30 seconds of
Yeah,
info.
exactly.
I mean, like, you can watch 5-minute video or you could read the doc.
Well, and there are places too,
Yeah.
like WSO2 user documentation on how to publish stuff, videos make sense there, but in like web service documentation, how the endpoints work,
I would
video doesn't
say,
really make a ton of sense.
in that
Like, some
case,
of
I'd
those
love to
cases.
just automatically generate that documentation from the Swagger document. Just say, put in any comments you need in the Swagger documentation for each endpoint. You can even link out to the more other overarching documentation from your markdown, and then you're done.
Which that is another aspect of this that we haven't discussed, is that we are going to start wanting all repositories to have a Swagger document in the repository, because the pipeline is going to use that for documentation.
It'll automatically
as well.
generate your WSO2 endpoint stuff from it, right?
Yeah,
You can
so-
import that in.
So the grand scheme of things is that once this is all ready, your repo will be able to push a documentation change as well as redeploy to WSO2 automatically through the pipeline. So the microservice will be able to handle both of those, whether they're two separate microservices. So, but there will be microservices to both be able to pull the documentation out and push it into the developer portal to be able to publish that there and update it. And when there is a change to the Swagger document, then the WSO2 implementation will be updated as well. And so the Swagger document, we want to be stored in the repository. We're probably just going to standardize it in the root as swagger.json.
Yeah.
But I mean, we'll document all of that once we're ready for that. But the idea is that both documentation and WSO2 will all be automatically updated through pipelines.
The
Less
only-
work
the only
on
caveat
everybody.
with that, I'm not sure, some projects may want the Swagger document in a particular place.
We're going to
for the-
have
For the
to
service to work,
standardize
and
it.
so I'm not sure if we can say,
For the
Here's
service
a-
to work?
yeah, for this, the services that,
That use
James is
Swagger.
writing, that uses Swagger, like auto
Yeah.
and stuff, so
Well, and so, but like,
we could point to where it may be in the repository, have a config file that says, here's where to go find the Swagger, whether it's relative on the root or where it's somewhere else. At least we can find it.
because like with what we talked about with
Mhm.
what Josh the other day was saying, that we can have one in the root that pieces all of those together because the references.
You do that,
Well,
or we could
that was-
add
that
the
was a different
Swagger
conversation
location in
in-
the meta file.
And how
We
you're
could do that.
constructing the Swagger document, that conversation was, when you build your Swagger document,
Yeah.
you can reference external files inside of it, but where the Swagger document lives is a separate.
Yeah.
discussion.
We might be able to put that in the meta.json, the repo meta file that we were talking about a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
We just say, this is where your Swagger file is.
Yeah, we could do that.
I mean,
And it's only for APIs, it's just APIs, right?
Sure,
So-
yeah,
Which we also only want one per repository,
yes.
because we can't, I mean, I don't want to have to build in the complexity of having multiple services deployed from one repository.
So which team is making the developer portal presentation?
That would be Sherwin's team, the Feta team.
And they're using Drupal for it?
Yeah,
Is
They
what-
will be, yeah.
Maybe we could identify some of these diagram tools where we could make it so the developer portal could actually render the image from our source file.
Yeah.
Like even if it's, even if it's an ASCII flowchart.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah.
And then, we might be able to retire the PNGs. And
I was already looking into that. You have to, at least the draw.io stuff is using a commercial backend. That's where
So
they
we
make their
can't
money,
Do it ourselves.
is on their backend.
The problem,
but there's
is-
other ones out there that we could probably.
the problem is too, is that we do want it to look right in GitHub.
Right.
Or anywhere else. We want the just markdown to look good.
Well, the GitHub will have an embedded image. So,
Yeah.
I mean, regardless of what we use, it'll have that image. But if our developer portal was making that image for us, I mean, that might be kind of convenient.
So the developer portal generates the image and then you link to that from Markdown.
Yeah.
It's really roundabout, but
And
yeah.
if we don't have the system documentation and developer portal, then we wouldn't be able to link to
I'm
it there.
thinking the developer portal could, show the markdown, have like a markdown element or have a diagram element or something. And the developer portal will show the diagram element as it is from the source, not from the PNG. And then eventually we could, get rid of the step of creating that.
It would be nice if that was automatic.
So one of the discussions that I had with Matt yesterday in my one-on-one, I had an extended discussion about developer portal. And what we want to get going quickly is, in order to solve this email issue of, and
Email to PDF, yeah.
Wiki and all of that kind of stuff, is to get a minimum viable product out.
Yeah.
And say, okay, this is minimum viable product. You can at least get into something and get the docs. It's not 100% where we want. Doesn't have all the modifications to everything. InfoHub's still not there because it's not populated, whatever it may be, but at least you can go someplace and get the docs.
Yeah.
And so in that instance, I think what we need to do is basically make a decision and say, you know what, for now, let's just try using draw.io and Markdown and get something out there, a very rudimentary Drupal thing, because then we can take a look at it and we say, okay, that's great, but it was a wonderful skateboard. Toss it. We still have everything in Markdown. We still have the document, we still have the diagrams. Okay, toss it, and now we take advantage of more of what Drupal can do. We take, advantage of the other stuff, but we start getting data and information out into our users' hands, because we're changing, with the change to WSO2, we're changing authorization, we're changing APIs. We've got now events out there, an event hub. We're changing how we want people to do everything. And we don't have any documents out there for them to work on.
So it's more about picking .io, we are, even though we get to put a source file in repo, we are plugged in.
We are.
Yeah.
And so, if Sherman's team had a recommendation, if they could find one that they thought they would be able to render live, then that's what we'd use for the MVP right now.
Yeah, it would be nice if whatever tool we had could save it in some sort of an open format.
Yeah,
Right?
that's the thing, is that the big thing about Draw is just that it saves the XML file.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what
We got a meeting with Sherman at 3:30 today.
Yeah, we do.
I will be gone.
Okay.
We can bring it up.
We'll bring up the.
Yeah. Because if we
MVP of the
can
Drupal side.
figure that piece out on what we want to use to draw, because because the Markdown stuff, I don't think there's any argument about using Markdown, and essentially using, if at all possible, we'll use Git's version of Markdown.
Yeah, we like the Git.
It's the extended Markdown that Git
You're
has.
saying GitHub's version?
GitHub,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
sorry.
So the other thing to decide is a drawing tool.
Yeah, it was a drawing tool, so that we
And
can,
there's
because we get
tons of
that.
them out there.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
get that. We can start
Use
bringing. We can start
I like
getting
the SDR. Let's just do SDR.
Well, and you could.
What's wrong with Draw.io?
The problem is that it doesn't really save it in an open format.
It's commercial and we couldn't, if it goes away, we gotta redo everything.
And it's and Google kills off some of their projects,
Google
So it's
Reader.
It's not a Google
Yeah.
project.
isn't it?
No,
I thought it's
it's
not.
one of their
No.
one-year projects.
No,
It's-
it's
So
It's a
the
company
issue,
called
Doug,
Bluegraph.
is if we're going to use a draw tool or
Um,
multiple draw tools, what we really want is them to save the source in an open format. So if somebody else uses a different draw tool, but that format is still supported, then it's not a problem.
Yeah.
That's really
That's
the
the
issue.
idea.
Draw.io, the XML file that if you go look at the XMLs, that is not an open format. It's a draw.io
Well,
format.
for an open format that runs in a browser without having to install a client, right?
That's exactly what we're looking for.
And
So,
allows us to
well,
have a nice UI to
even
actually
if
create
it
that.
Oh, yeah, no,
required a
that's-
client, I don't
that's
know that the
just
web
a
is.
big
so
64
required.
encoded
I know
binary
that
data.
one. It's not the
I just-
What's that?
The content of
What about
this
this one? It's fine.
XML file,
That's very interesting.
there's a little bit of metadata
and then a blob.
and then a blob. I'm
That's
going
okay.
through
Probably-
base 64 decode.
This is
but-
probably what the other one is based off of, because Draw.io is by Jake.
Yeah, no, it's just random binary stuff.
But I think you can save it as an SVG, right?
Yeah, but you can't then suck that back in and edit it.
Why not?
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
import
see.
it, you can import it. So I'm gonna
Like
draw some.
Photoshop.
When I did, it says supported format for import is .xml file.
Yeah.
You can only import the XML, and it has to
Okay.
be the XML saved from this.
So in order to just kind of wrap this up a little bit, so I think the draw tool is the question. We got to figure out the draw tool thing. You guys have a meeting with Sherwin this afternoon. That's great.
Talk about putting in a VP
But
on the
Markdown and
group side.
GitHub, and we'll try to figure out with the developer portal team. We'll try to come back. We could have these discussions at Glue too, but
And so it doesn't matter if it ever went away.
do what?
He has a potential.
Well, it's what Matthew
Drawing
just
tool.
sent me, but JGraph, it seems like JGraph's like front end, but it's open source. It's on GitHub. And so unless they're somehow plugging into their proprietary backend from GitHub, we could at least take that code and put it elsewhere if they, for some reason, could ever shut down.
Save as drawing.xml.
Okay.
Oh, do you know what? Never mind. The save, I didn't even get that far, so.
Save broke, export as XML.
But this is pretty awesome.
Is it export?
Yeah, so that must be where they're
405
trying to
allowed.
hit their.
So they've got you have to have their engine in the background of some type. Okay.
Yeah, that's
So-
$7,000.
Who's got the assignment to go
JGraph
choose
is.
one, and we'll just go with it.
Or what is?
The dev portal team.
Well, the
We're
JGraph
gonna get that
product.
to Sherwin.
Where the
Developers portal.
the developer portal team's responsible for this.
They'll just choose the MC and we'll all start using it, okay?
Okay. So we're done
Hopefully.
with that.
That's cool.
And